Exxon is facing major heat after a video was released of lobbyist Keith McCoy detailing how the company fought climate change policy. Following an uproar, McCoy issued an apology saying in part, quote, "My statements clearly do not represent ExxonMobil's positions on important public policy issues." Of course, he's just their senior lobbyist.
Exxon CEO also apologized, calling the comments inconsistent with what they expect of their people. He also reaffirmed their commitments to working on finding solutions to climate change. And of course, what he means is that what they said publicly is inconsistent with what they normally say publicly because they thought they were speaking privately.
It's perfectly consistent with what they expect of their senior lobbyists. It's actually this apology is more fodder to talk about the entire story because it's putting into words the opposite of what is true. They say that this is wildly inconsistent with what they expect from their employees, when in fact what McCoy was saying is literally what he was hired to do. And at this point, Exxon is saving pay. Exxon knows that that's utter BS. Like, they obviously know that because they hire McCoy to do exactly what he was talking about doing, massaging lawmakers to advance their priorities, which are often out of whack with the public's priorities. And, you know, that's not always the same thing. Exxon's priorities, like, we can dispense with this, like, notion that Exxon's priorities are largely the public's priorities because they're generating capital. Obviously, that's not the case. And so, no, I mean, I think this apology is, like, perfect. Again, in the same way that video, which was, I think, released by Greenpeace UK, was perfect. The apology is perfect.
Right. It's like, hey, this isn't what we say publicly. This is not consistent with what we say publicly. It might be consistent with what we've done over time. They have not fired him. Not that I'm saying they should fire him.
Give him a raise.
He's doing his job. Right. It appears that the way he got fished was the Greenpeace pretended to be some kind of Gulf oil company. And was trying to and was tricking him into kind of almost like pitching for business. Like they were claiming they were looking for help in Washington with lobbying. So it's like, well, what do you do? And so in that situation, it's clever on Greenpeace's part because then he has an incentive to even puff up what his actual role is in Washington. But he's not going to change kind of the political analysis that he generates. And the political analysis is the thing that was so revealing because he just says straight up that the things that they're saying publicly, they're saying for PR purposes, and they don't really mean, and that behind the scenes, they're actually trying to slow any action on climate change. So it's useless to hear then from Exxon's CEO, no, we're totally committed to climate change, don't worry.
Well, I think even beyond useless, it's super meta, first of all, because you have him saying, it's basically him predicting the response. He's like, listen, we say one thing publicly and then privately we do something different. And then Exxon comes out and is like, here's what we're going to say publicly. It's kind of perfect. And things are getting even more interesting because Congressman Khanna, who's been on the show recently, is now demanding the executives at Exxon, Shell, Chevron, and other major oil and gas companies appear before Congress. The chairman of the House Oversight Subcommittee on Environment called the leaked videos appalling and is calling on the companies to answer questions about the effort to wage, quote, disinformation campaigns around climate change. Ryan, how do you think that plays out?
Well, it's really fascinating to see Democrats actually wielding subpoena power. Democrats tend not to be any good at wielding power. They get into office, and then they just kind of stop there. They're like, okay, we've got the gavel. What could I do with this gavel? It makes a nice noise. No, actually, what you can do with that gavel is you can now subpoena, and you have the predicate to do it, all of these oil companies to ask them, have you been lying to us? You know, is it true that these public positions that you're taking are in effect nothing more than smokescreens so that you can pursue an alternative strategy? And if so, you actually start to have SEC legal implications involved. If they're telling investors that they believe climate change is a fundamental threat to their business model, which they are, and behind the scenes, instead of actually trying to address climate change and mitigate this problem for their business model that they claim they have, that they are actually stalling progress, then they're going counter to what they're telling their investors. And that's still something to this day that prosecutors get interested in, because in a capitalist economy, that is functional, you're not supposed to be able to lie to investors publicly.
That is functional, right? That is the perfect caveat. And again, I would love to see this play out in Congress, because that video was sort of, we've said this, but it was a great encapsulation of what truly does happen behind the scenes. It is as both like incompetent and devious as it's made out to be in movies. And this is just one example. Like the climate issue is one example, but this happens across the slate of issues that Congress deals with. And so I think what he said absolutely rises for the reason that Ryan just mentioned SEC-wise, but also just for abuses of our lobbying laws. I think it absolutely rises to the point where you would want that you can issue a subpoena to get them in front of Congress. And to watch that play out, it's not just that it would be an abuse of our lobbying laws or that it has been an abuse, it's that our lobbying laws are abusive in and of themselves. And so to watch that, I think, play out would be extremely helpful for the public. Keep this in the news, because this is where the real influence in Washington is coming from. It's coming from people like McCoy, who are doing exactly what you just saw play out on the video.
Yeah, and I think so Democrats can tie it to corporate America lying about what their agenda is in Washington. They can probably, if they wanted to, try to figure out a way to tie it to high gas prices, which which is a way then to try to connect climate change and bad oil company behavior to people's pocketbooks and to people's immediate material conditions, because we know that you're only going to get so far with people when you lead with climate change, because first of all, people don't believe that the government, a lot of swing voters don't believe that the government has the capacity, is actually going to deliver and save the planet for their children.
Right.
They don't believe the government can successfully fill potholes. So
they can't.
So in order to reach them on a different level, like, look at these lying oil companies that are lying to you, lying to the public, and jacking up gas prices all the while. That all they care about is lining their pockets and making as big a profit every quarter as they can.
Yeah, and one of the interesting things that Congressman Khanna said, he's like, listen, people, we've had tech come, because he invited basically Exxon to come testify, and that's why he threatened the subpoena, and we'll see how responsive they are to it. But he's like, listen, people from tech have come and they've sat down and talked to us, and that's kind of the difference I see between the oil and gas industry right now and the tech industry, where there's this incredible arrogance in the tech industry. They think that they can just come to Congress and BS Congress and everything will be fine. But I think the oil and gas industry actually legitimately has started to feel the heat and feels very pressured and defensive. And I think that's probably why they're dodging the subpoena, because they know that it would be, dodging the request and perhaps dodging the subpoena, because they know that it would just continue the fallout from the video. It's not, you can't help it. You can't fix that.
I mean, at the same time, we know that in the 70s and 80s, Exxon ran this massive research project to determine what the effect of their business was on the climate, determined that it was catastrophic, and then buried that and instead pushed their propaganda in a completely different direction. We know all of that. There are lawsuits around it now. It hasn't damaged their standing too badly in Washington.
Their stock is up, by the way.
I'm sure it is.
In more ways than one. Well, we have more rising for you after this. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any of our new content.